Sonic is a series that has gone through a ton of unique iterations in the span of its existence. Sonic Team, as a developer, has never been scared of experimentation. While some of these experiments have led to enjoyable and unique gameplay experiences, many more have been dead ends never to be revisited again. Despite this high degree of experimentation, there are several recurring elements of Sonic gameplay that seem to be tethered to positive fan and critical feedback. If one were to take a hard look at some of the most popular or infamous titles in the Sonic series, these elements would become easily identifiable. By identifying these elements, the games that utilize them, which ones utilize them well, and which ones forgo them entirely, patterns will begin to emerge in terms of what aspects inherent to the series should be considered essential and which are to be considered auxiliary. What's important for fans to be aware of is the distinct difference between the elements of Sonic that are fundamental and which are supplemental. To address it head on, there will be Sonic fans who listen to this essay who will be up in arms about the fact that their preferred element is not included on this list. To those fans, I say first off, these elements will be primarily mechanic-based, the elements necessary to ensure a Sonic game plays well. Second, if I can come up with a concrete example of an excellent Sonic game that doesn't utilize a potential essential element, that's proof that it's not really essential and therefore will not be necessary to have in every Sonic game, hence why it won't be included. That's not saying that they're bad elements just because they're not essential, just that they're not essential. Also, for the record, I can't say all, if any of these ideas can be considered my own. If you're someone like me who has hung around Sonic web communities like Sonic Retro for the better part of a decade, you are likely to have come across most of these concepts at one point or another. This essay is purely to consolidate those ideas into a single referential tool for future use, as well as for public record when I utilize this as a metric for my reviews of Sonic Forces and Sonic Mania's gameplay mechanics when they come out later this year. For an example of what a theoretical Sonic game would look like utilizing some of these elements correctly, I highly recommend the Sonic Spitball series by Shay May. Although I don't agree with absolutely everything that he states in his essays, they are still, by far, the best videos ever made on the topic of Sonic design theory, and I don't see them being topped by anyone anytime soon, least of all by my videos. I would also recommend checking out Sonic Utopia, a fantastic proof of concept of how purely classic elements would translate to a real 3D product. The answer is extremely well. After a lot of analysis on top of nearly 20 years of Sonic fandom, I believe that the core tenets of the series are thus. Speed is momentum-based. Low skill floor, high skill ceiling. Level design conveys direction and shifts in pace. And finally, automation should augment, not override. With that out of the way, let's take a deeper look at these four tenets and why they are so imperative to a great Sonic experience. Speed is momentum-based. One of the most oft-repeated mantras in the Sonic fandom is speed is a reward. For a Sonic fan with context about what this means in practice, this saying works well enough. But for a casual or non-fan, it leaves out the most important factor of the speed of Sonic. Momentum. The obtaining of momentum in effective Sonic games is the equivalent of obtaining currency in games with economy mechanics. It's not an over-exaggeration to call momentum a commodity in Sonic games. The loss of momentum should either be a direct result of player input or lack of well-timed input. While the early Sonics were much more steeped in platforming challenges than in later entries, one consistency is that momentum is just as, if not more important, as well-timed and placed jumps to open up different paths through the zones. The more skilled the player, the more options that are available to the player in terms of how they progress. There will be more to say about that in the next tenet as well. Even in the faster-paced boost games, expert use of momentum both on the ground and in midair can still make new paths available that aren't otherwise accessible. You can see this in some crazy speedruns of games like Sonic Unleashed and Generations, to see what this means in a 3D environment. The strongest games in the series are the ones that utilize momentum mechanics most freely. As for the games that don't, you need look no further than Sonic Lost World to see what a Sonic game sans momentum actually looks like. The mechanics of Lost World isolate the concept of speed from that of momentum, giving players the former while completely disposing of the latter. Sonic operates on a gear shift mechanic in Lost World, a mechanic with immense amounts of potential and concept, but critically flawed in this specific game's execution. Sonic has three modes: yogging, running, and spin dashing, but there's very little build-up involved with any of these modes. Nearly the moment a new mode is entered, Sonic is moving at the gear's top speed with no speed gradients. Furthermore, terrain has zero effect on the speed at which Sonic is traveling, making any change in terrain purely aesthetic, not functional. The only move in Sonic's Lost World repertoire with any momentum of note is wall running, but this momentum is again entirely without consequence due to the level design either always having a parallel wall to jump to, getting him going full tilt once more, or not being a long enough stretch to to even worry about running out of momentum. Even the boost games, which some fans errantly claim to be boost to win, still function on a momentum system in Sonic's non-boost running mode, though not with nearly as much nuance as the classic titles or even the adventure titles. And even the boost mode still has a degree of momentum gradients involved as well, making it significantly more effective than Lost World's complete momentum vacuum. The utilization of momentum in Sonic games put the entirety of how the game plays squarely in the hands of the player, allowing the player's skill to define the experience a Sonic game conveys. That brings us to the second tenet. Low skill floor, high skill ceiling. The heart of nearly all of the best realized Sonic games revolved around the idea of speedrunning. The more you play, the better you get. The better you get, the faster you go. This is a concept Yuji Naka intended for the gameplay of Sonic from the very beginning of the series. The gradients afforded to players through Sonic gameplay by way of momentum allows the player to have an enjoyable thrill ride, but also allows the game to evolve with the player. As the player continues to play, their understanding of Sonic's momentum and physics grows. As that understanding grows, they will recognize opportunities they may have previously been unaware of during a first playthrough. Nothing about the zones themselves have changed, but the players become more accomplished. Therefore, a returning player will have an entirely different experience than a first-time player. This is a direct result of the inherent genius of Sonic design philosophy at work, an elegant simplicity that had no parallel at the time of Sonic's debut, and arguably has not been fully replicated by any franchise ever since. Or even the Sonic series itself in some of the most unrefined cases. This specific concept is one of the most misunderstood and underappreciated elements that the Sonic series has built itself on. This is, in part, likely due to the portrayal of Sonic in Sega's marketing campaigns in the early days. Most listeners of this essay will know that at the time of Sonic's introduction, Sega was in an arms race with Nintendo to prove that they had a competitive console in the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive. Seeing how Sega had a superior processor to the Super Nintendos when it came to pure processing speed, they wanted a mascot that could convey that in a tangible way. In that regard, Sonic's 16-bit titles were just as much tech demos as they were actual games. This is a trap that Sonic Team has often fallen into with other titles in the series to different degrees of detrimental results. This is a topic that I touched on a bit in Why Sonic Isn't Cool Anymore, but I would like to discuss this in further detail in a different essay in the future. But as it stands, the intent to use Sonic as a show of force led to a marketing campaign that placed complete emphasis on Sonic's speed and not the intricacy that the speed afforded the player when it came to exploration and speedrunning. This is an understandable move for Sega to have made considering what the advertising was intended to do. Primarily move units. This approach, however, has presented a somewhat disingenuous picture of where Sonic's gameplay strengths truly lie, a picture that has been adapted by a large multitude of the gaming population to this day. It's led to a common fallacy that you hear from gamers everywhere, popularized by the YouTube player Aaron Hansen of the Game Grumps. That fallacy is, even the classic Sonic games are bad because they discourage you from going fast. This is an extremely simplistic and inaccurate way of looking at Sonic's gameplay philosophy. Sonic games, specifically the ones that utilize a skill floor and a skill ceiling effectively, don't discourage speed, they encourage player improvement. And as previously stated, the power is in the hands of the player to act upon that opportunity. If the player does not wish to learn and take advantage of the tools presented to them within Sonic's mechanics, that's totally their prerogative. And for a show like Game Grumps that's more about the entertainment factor and not about the actual playing of the games, it's totally understandable for a YouTube personality like Egoraptor to stay at the lowest skill tier. It's funnier that way, and it drives more traffic from irate Sonic fans to his videos. His assertions that even classic Sonic games are bad is measurably incorrect, but I can't argue with the success that he's built off of it. I can only hope that other gamers may develop a better understanding of the series' strengths so that the errant shorthand of the gotta go fast mentality will start to be debunked in the gaming public consciousness, provided of course that Sonic Team itself doesn't forget that it's inaccurate. Sonic Team, you've been drinking too much of your own Kool-Aid. I'm cutting you off. I'm sorry. However, an intricate, skill-oriented experience requires a complementary approach to level design that ensures that the player is aware of the possibilities available to them. This leads to the third core Sonic tenet. Level design should convey direction and shifts in pace. While the gotta go fast mentality is conceptually inaccurate in the classic titles as well as more often than not in the later titles, another detrimental element tied to it often does have some merit. Levels can occasionally give no warning of incoming obstacles, changes in level pace, or give a clear sense of direction. Sonic Unleashed day stages are probably the worst citable offender when it comes to giving little to no warning of upcoming obstacles. UI caution signs can only do so much when the rate of speed of the boost is so high. It's exasperated even further by the fact that the game's skill floor and skill ceiling are considerably more narrow than in previous games as well, making it an understandably frustrating entry even for some of the bigger Sonic fans. While I myself personally really enjoy Sonic Unleashed, I can't say that it doesn't have some serious problems in terms of level conveyance. While generally the issue crops up more in the modern Sonic titles, that's not to say that examples of poor level conveyance can't be seen in the classics as well. Speaking of conveyance, credit where credit is due. Despite being wrong when it comes to a lot of the elements of Sonic, there's no denying denying that Egoraptor's Mega Man X Sequelitis is chock full of excellent points about gameplay mechanics, and I highly recommend it. But I digress. The worst example I can think of when it comes to poor conveyance of direction, danger, and shifts in pace in the classic Sonic titles is Sonic 2's Metropolis Zone. The labyrinthine design of Metropolis Zone will confuse all but the most experienced Sonic 2 players. I still get turned around more often than I care to admit, and I've been playing Sonic 2 for over 15 years. Its long straight corridors give no warning about the shellcracker and slicer badniks that might be waiting right off screen. These badniks and their attack patterns, in conjunction with the vertically narrow portions of the level design, leave little margin for error when it comes to player evasion. Fortunately, the rest of Sonic 2 and the classics at large mostly avoid these design mistakes. Mostly. In fact, most of the classic titles do an extremely good job of conveying or naturally shifting the pace of a zone in its level design. While it may occasionally feel abrupt, early Sonic games will almost never trick you into running right into a trap. They will give a natural in-game indication through level design that the zone is going in a different direction than it had been previously going up till that point. And if you've developed enough skill by that point, there's a good chance you won't even need to contend with that change in level design. You'll likely have stayed on a more straightforward path due to being closer to the skill ceiling than the skill floor. While the 3D Sonic titles haven't done this quite as consistently as their classic predecessors, there are still excellent examples of this in 3D titles. A trick the 3D titles rely on often is to have Sonic be launched up into the sky, giving the player an overhead view of the challenges that lie ahead. It's a unique approach that works well in games with the Z-axis that don't have the same benefits in a 2D setting. Some Sonic games may stray further from clear conveyance than others. Specifically Sonic CD, whose emphasis was more on discovering goals within the zones themselves. Remember when I said the classics mostly had good conveyance? Sonic CD is pretty much the wholesale exception. That's the reason why, despite me loving CD, I can't qualify it as an excellent Sonic title, despite it doing so many other things right. Sonic CD's level design is pretty much a mess, and it probably has the least amount of conveyance towards forward movement of any of the classic titles, making it the least refined classic title from a mechanic standpoint. While I can grant the CD has much more of an explorative leaning to its design than the other games in the series, I can also point to Sonic 3 and Knuckles as a game that did that concept much better, making CD's execution look even shoddier by comparison. See Wacky Workbench, Collision Chaos, and Stardust Speedway. When level design creates a sense of geographic location and evokes a sense of caution by way of carefully positioned obstacles and terrain shifts, the result is a zone that communicates well with the player and generally requires no further directional assistance. Despite this, however, Sonic Team still often seems to rely on the video game equivalent of a tour guide as a redundancy, which I'll now get into with the final core Sonic tenant. Automation should augment, not override. A complaint often lodged against the modern Sonic titles, stretching as far back as Sonic Adventure, and often a complaint that is painfully true, is that there's far too much automation in Sonic games. Many players have become upset with the frequency that Sonic titles will pull away control from the player to present a completely automated sequence of boost pads, spring trails, or a chase sequence meant to do nothing but impress. While such a sequence may be impressive the first time, the subsequent playthroughs will result in that feeling diminishing every time until it may as well be a glorified loading screen. While Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 are not nearly as big of offenders as the boost games in this regard, this is where the majority of the problem started. Sonic's patented loops, originally intended to be a level element through which a player could increase their speed naturally, utilizing Sonic's established physics, became entirely useless from a functionality standpoint. Boost pads now became the primary source of speed, as opposed to allowing skilled players to earn their own, almost single-handedly narrowing the skill floor and the skill ceiling to a single plane, obliterating most Sonic gameplay's inherent strength. These problems may be negligible to some fans. Sure, it breaks up the flow, but they're usually pretty brief and unobtrusive, right? Well, that might be true in many cases. Until the scripted sequences break. Oftentimes, Sonic games have notoriously rushed development cycles that lead to cut corners. Sonic 06 is the most notable representation of this in the series, but short development times have been a hallmark of the series since the very beginning. The problem simply didn't become as significant until the jump to 3D, where projects became significantly bigger, more complex, and arduous. Couple this with the shackle of a hard deadline, and you're headed for disaster. And often, these disasters come in the form of failed scripted sequences that break more often than they work. This can apply to a newly released game or a botched port of an older game that initially worked consistently, or at the very least decently. As bad as games with failed sequences are, they're not nearly as egregious as the games that depend on scripted sequences just to function. This notorious issue is most prominent in the 1-2 punch that was Sonic 4 Episodes 1 and 2. Sonic 4's half-baked physics at this point are legendary. Episode 1's complete missing of the mark when it came to being an accurately playing Sonic game was bad enough on its own, but the insult to injury came with how Dimps, the game's developer, glossed over their laziness instead of addressing and fixing it. Instead of going back and making the physics of the game work work within its own level design, DIMPS instead made the conscious decision to shoehorn the gameplay into working with the level design. The boost pads from Sonic 2's Chemical Plant Zone were brought back for the title, but in the context of Sonic 4, they were utilized to navigate Sonic through the level because the physics as coded didn't allow Sonic to do so of his own volition. The game was too broken for the level design to actually function as required. The ability to walk on walls and ceilings was also notoriously utilized for the same reason, to get Sonic through parts of the level that he could not get through naturally. This direction was absolutely shameful, and Sonic Team likely knew it. Despite slight improvements to the physics seen in Sonic 4 Episode 2, it was too little too late. DIMPS has not developed another Sonic game since. That mantle has since been passed to Christian Taxman Whitehead and Simon Stealth Tomley, who have gone a long way to do classic Sonic correctly in their remastered Sonic 1, 2, and CD, and now Sonic Mania. Compare Sonic 4 to how the classic titles handled automation. For the sake of comparison, let's discuss the boost pads from Chemical Plant Zone once more to contrast the correct use of automation from the incorrect. Many modern fans, playing devil's advocate, will often cite that the problem with automation actually began with Sonic 2 and its use of boost pads, removing skill from obtaining higher speeds. This is not accurate, however. While the boost pads in Sonic 2 do not require skill to activate, they do indeed require skill to utilize to their maximum potential, creating a micro instance of a skill ceiling. A basic skill floor player of Sonic 2 can run into a boost pad and get an exhilarating burst of speed, but a player pushing closer to the skill ceiling will know that rolling into the boost pad and utilizing the level terrain to redirect their obtained momentum in an upwards jump will allow the player to completely bypass the infamous raising water portion of Chemical Plant Zone, shaving precious seconds off the speedrun time, once again reinforcing the second tenet. Contrast that to most of the automation in modern Sonic games, where automation will either completely suspend player control, will cause the player to die if they do attempt to break the sequence, or, the worst of both worlds, will suspend player control and kill the player simultaneously. Automation has its place in Sonic games. It's been utilized to great memorable effects in Sonic 1. But when it's used as a crutch to keep broken mechanics operational, or to present something that is all spectacle and no substance, they're better left on the cutting room floor. Sonic games, like any piece of media, is a culmination of a ton of moving parts moving in tandem to create a cohesive whole. While all of the elements have their part to play, it's imperative that the fundamental structural elements are prioritized above all else to avoid putting the cart before the horse. Story, music, aesthetic choice, and other presentational aspects may be the most important priorities to fans who don't have a firm grasp on game development, but it's important that those things never be prioritized over assuring that the game has a solid gameplay framework first and foremost. Otherwise, you might end up with another Sonic and the Black Knight situation where Sonic Team got pretty much everything else right except for the gameplay. These four tenets are only the most cursory elements necessary for creating that solid gameplay framework. Just because other elements may not be nearly as imperative doesn't make them bad or unimportant by comparison. Well-executed supplemental elements can only serve to improve a game further from the standard already established by sound core tenets. If there was a guarantee that Sonic Forces was going to apply any of these tenets effectively, I would be more optimistic than I am trepidatious for it. If there was an assurance of a sound gameplay structure behind Forces' identity crisis-esque decision-making, then I would be fine overlooking the more questionable aspects being implemented in the game. But until the addressing of the core tenets becomes the first step in the development of all future Sonic games, future Sonic announcements will always be met with fear and ridicule rather than genuine excitement from a large part of the fan base. That's all I've got. Have a good one.